Hi, it's Mike with UGtastic. I'm here again at Groupon, and I'm sitting here with Trek Glowacki, who runs or co-organizes the Chicago Ember.js, but he's also a member of the Ember.js core team. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Sure. So Ember.js. Now, right now we're in kind of a whole bunch of client-side frameworks, and Ember is one of the big ones. What got you into Ember so much that you became part of the core team?
That's a good question. So I started programming in Rails, sort of serious development in Rails, like a lot of people did, and was doing mostly client work. And it got to the point that my clients, the expectations they had about what a web application could do sort of get higher and higher, thanks to things like Facebook and Gmail. And they started demanding sort of higher levels of interactivity and reactivity than a server-generated app can generate. And so at the time, like many people, I was searching for a framework, but also realizing the stuff out there wasn't very good and working on a framework. And this was around the time that a previous framework called Sprout Core had been forked to sort of adopt more of web standards. And I was basically trolling UGtastic on the internet saying, like, this is awful, why isn't this done yet? And his pitch was like, this has been a work in progress for multiple years, and this is how far we are. If you can think of any other project that has started, go work on that. But it's a hard project, and we're the ones making the progress. And I was like, you're right, so I have to go help, because I've tried to do this myself. And
he kind of just called you out.
He called me out. He was like, stop complaining and start helping. And at that time, one of the major drawbacks of all the frameworks were there was just no documentation about how to use any of them. So I just cracked my laptop and started with like the first file alphabetically, read through it, and started writing documentation for all the internals. And then eventually we started working on sort of guides and screencasts and videos.
Okay, so you've mostly been education and documentation and awareness. Does sometimes when you're in there doing documentation, does that feedback like, hey, this doesn't make any sense?
Yes, for sure. So like everyone in Ember Core kind of works on a little bit of everything, but many people have areas of focus. Mine in the past was documentation, and if something is hard to explain in English, it probably means it's a bad API. If you can't talk about it fluently, it's really hard to explain it to new people. It's probably hard to understand. So that definitely feeds back into what the public APIs end up looking like.
So when people are looking at when an open source project is calling for documentation, this isn't just something that's fluffy and nice to have. It helps define the terminology of the
Absolutely, and I actually think, I'm biased, but I think documentation work or learning and education is actually some of the hardest open source work to do. Not only do you have to be have enough engineering chops to read through code and understand what it's doing and what its intent is, you also have to have enough communication and teaching chops to then distill that down into useful examples, pithy descriptions. Having both of those skills is sort of complicated. I have 2 degrees. I have an undergrad in English literature and a master's degree in human-computer interaction. So I think the 2 of those combined is kind of maybe like an ideal person to go around and being like, how does this work? And if the answer is nobody knows, to tell the world how it works.
And so you got involved, you started doing this documentation. How did that transition from being a contributor to being a member of the team?
So at the time we didn't have like an official core team. It was just a free-for-all of people contributing however they felt they could best help. And I was doing a lot of contributions, both code and documentation. And then before the first Ember conference, March of 2 years ago, a lot of the heavy contributors were sitting in a room, and it was like, this should be our core team. These would be the people who sort of guide the framework moving forward.
So it was kind of just, who's here? Who's contributing?
Yep, who's here, who's contributing, who doesn't seem like they're a total bozo. Because even in any open source project or any project in general, you get people who are like heavy committers, but sort of have a weird notion about how things should be done, either because strange perspective or limited experience. So there's the combination of like who's committing heavily and who seems like they're not going to commit craziness into the code base.
So there's trust involved.
Yep, a lot of trust involved.
So you're involved in Ember. Now you're running a user group. How did that evolve? This is your first user group?
This will be the Ember.js user group was my first one. I kind of fell into it. There was a lot of enthusiasm in Chicago early on for Ember. I was already overwhelmed doing my full-time job here at Groupon, doing UI development, and then all my open source contributions. In a lot of ways, it's like I work 2 full-time jobs. And then someone was like, we should do a meetup, and I'm like, yes, you should do a meetup, and I would be happy to attend. So he started doing those, and also had limited time. So there were just a lot of mess ups in scheduling times and getting speakers. So I think we scheduled once like September of 2 years ago, and then like failed to actually hold the event like 4 or 5 times in a row.
Oh.
And then in January he was just like, I can't do this anymore, and I was like, I guess it's my responsibility now.
Yeah. So you didn't let it die.
I did not let it die. No.
Yeah. So have you learned a lot? Did it change your way you interact with the community? I mean, before you mostly were probably online communicating with people. Now you're actually meeting in meet space with people.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot about both who's using Ember and sort of what difficulties they have, which definitely informs, where public APIs need to be nicer. But I also learned a lot about running a user group. I think there's this perception that a lot of people have that like I definitely hear a lot of like, oh, it's not that hard to put one together,
yeah.
Or So sometimes people want to charge for user groups, like $5-10, and people don't understand, like, why would you charge? They should be free. Not understanding that, like, just the materials cost of a small meetup can easily be like $500-600. If you toss time in there, like, you're pushing, for a small 30-40 person meetup once a month, you're pushing at like $1,000-2,000 of setup time, which is kind of eye-opening for me. So I'm much more appreciative now of other meetups where I go to, and I'm just like, the hard work that goes into that is pretty impressive.
Yeah, people don't realize the personal time that goes into that.
Yeah,
because you think about it, if you're a consultant.
Yeah, I mean, if I were billing at my hourly rate for a meetup, it would have to be really like, no one could hold meetups if you did that because they'd be too expensive.
Yeah. So has it overall been a positive experience? Are you looking at like, oh, this has been a lot of fun, or has it been maybe not quite as much fun? And this is not meaning to nitpick because we all have different experiences, and I've talked about with user groups, it's okay to quit if it's not fun. Has it been enjoyable?
Yeah, I think it's super fun. I'm always excited to see the ways people are using Ember. Back when we started fairly early on, we were heavily pushing for like Ember.js is for apps. It's not just a view layer like Angular or React is. I mean, I think the Angular and React people would be very open, and like, I know the React guys are basically like, we're kind of a replacement for jQuery. We're not a full application framework, and Ember is a full application framework. And yet we kept getting people doing presentations of like, I built this content site in Ember, or like my HTML and CSS person doesn't know a lot of JavaScript. He uses a rapid prototyping tool, which was just like, oh, I never would have thought people would use it. Like, we're very focused on the application case, but it turns out when you end up with like a meaningful set of primitives, you can compose them in all sorts of useful ways.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's more like how Rails has become. It's where it's a multi-purpose general built-in app.
Yep, for sure.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.
Talking to me.
Thanks. And just real quick, you're on Meetup, right?
Yep, we're on meetup.com. Our next meetup should be later this month, if this gets published in time.
But do you have a regular schedule?
We don't have a regular schedule, so mostly what I'll do is I'll put a call out for proposals. People can use the Meetup site to say, like, I'd like to talk about this. When enough people say that sounds like a cool topic, then we sort of go searching for a time and a venue.
Okay, so if you're interested in Ember and JavaScript, check out the Meetup. Yep. Thanks. Okay.
User groups with lots to say, interviews and more. No way! Sharing great ideas in the tech community. Fascinating conversations, a plethora of information. Find out for yourself today at UGtastic.com.